All right, let's give Unit 2 of the review guide a go here. We are doing Ideals of the Young Republic and the Constitution. So, again, I'm not going to read all of this to you. I think you guys are fully capable of reading it. But what we are going to do is walk through the questions here. So, first question: what were the Articles of Confederation and why were they made so weak and ineffectual? So, if we go back up to where it's talking about the Articles of Confederation, we are looking at they were made in response to British injustice and tyranny. Remember, as we were in the colonies, we have this overarching government that is extremely powerful. It's suppressing the people's rights, and that's something that, as we created our own country, we didn't want to deal with anymore. And it's not that we didn't want a government at all. It's just that we wanted the states to have more power than the federal government, and that's what made it so ineffective. It also was weak because they couldn't coin their own money. Remember, they weren't really collecting taxes. That was kind of a bad idea. I don't know how you have a government without taxes, but we ran into problems with that as well. So let's take a peek. The next question: what was one benefit of the Articles of Confederation? It did create a system for Western expansion. Remember, the only thing that the Articles of Confederation did right was the Northwest Ordinance. The only thing right. Oh, come on. Is the Northwest Ordinance. So a system of adding new territories out west. How many people do you have to have out there? When do you become a territory? How do you become a state? All of that good stuff. Alrighty, next question. Shays Rebellion. Remember, we only talk about 2 rebellions. The first one is Shays. This one is going to show us the weaknesses of the new government. Remember, we had the poor farmers in Massachusetts that were upset over all the debt that they had come up to, and instead of paying that debt, they were going to burn the buildings down that housed the papers that said they had debt. And if the papers weren't there, well, then I guess they didn't have any debt, right? Wrong, but the problem that we saw here is that because the government didn't have any money, they couldn't create an army, and there was no National Guard, nothing like that. So when we have a rebellion, no one was coming to put it down. What happened at the Constitutional Convention? All right, so at the Constitutional Convention, we realized that the Articles of Confederation were absolutely awful, and we are coming up with a new plan of government, which is the Constitution. Montesquieu. What were the separate branches in the government? So if we go ahead and look at separation of powers under Montesquieu, we've got executive, legislative, and judiciary. Why were the 3 branches of government created? Checks and balances. If all of the power was given to one branch and there were no separation of powers, then we would not be able to check one, and we could turn into a government similar to what was in England. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, so we create a system of checks and balances. Major debate or issue discussed at the convention. The big issue that we have is the balance of power between the state and national or federal government. We don't want to have too weak of a federal government. We don't want to have too strong of a federal government. We're looking just like Red Riding Hood for the perfect balance between the state and the national government. Now we're looking at what was the Great Compromise. Great Compromise gave us that bicameral or two-house legislature. We get the House of Representatives and we get the Senate. We figure out that the House of Representatives is based on population, and then we are equally represented by 2 representatives in the Senate. All of that comes from the Great Compromise. What other words are like bicameral, which also mean 2 of something? We could go with bike. That's the best I got for you on that one. You come up with some more words for me and I'll take them. Okay, section 2 over here. Let's keep scrolling. What is the purpose of the Constitution? We like those purpose questions, right? The purpose of the Constitution is to tell us the rules and procedure of how our government works. It outlines what the government is for us. What is the purpose of the preamble? Take a listen to the Schoolhouse Rock video again, but if we look at the preamble, it is the introduction and it describes the purpose of the government. It says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. No, I'm not going to sing it to you. It tells you what the document is going to say, just like any good introduction would do. What idea of governance is supported by we the people? We know that that is popular sovereignty. And I might have spelled that wrong, but we all know I can't spell. And explain its significance. Remember, popular does not mean who is the most popular. It means the people, the populace, and sovereignty is the idea that we give up power to the government in order to be governed. And you can find that definition above as well. Why was the power of our government limited? This goes back to how we felt about Great Britain during this time. We did not want to go back to the time of having a king, so we limit the power of the government in order to best suit the people, and that is all they can do. How might these limitations reflect how the colonists felt about the monarchy of the mother country in England? We didn't like how England ran us, so we didn't want to model that. We wanted to make it a little bit different. Duty of the legislative branch. Remember, legislative is to make the laws. Your next question is, who is a part of the legislative branch? The Senate, the House of Representatives. So you have senators and you have representatives. The next question, 3 powers of the legislative branch. Let's go back up and look at that. You can choose any of these powers here. You've got impeachment, regulates money and trade, declares war, provides for defense, taxes, treaties, presidential appointments. You've got it. Duty of the executive branch. Enforce the laws and treaties. Who's a part of it? President, vice president, and then you can go through and look at the powers here. And we can finish it right off with judicial branch, explain and interpret the laws. You've got the Supreme Court, the federal courts, and then the powers are listed here. Most notably, we want judicial review, and if we remember, this is Marbury versus Madison. That gives us the power of judicial review. Remember, that is to decide if laws are constitutional. So the constitutionality of laws. Good. Did we miss any questions? We got it. Okay. Section 3. Aspects and powers of the Constitution. Why was the Constitution made flexible? Remember, we want that change over time. If here they say adaptable over time. It's the same thing. You want to have a government that meets the needs of a changing nation. We are not the same people as the founding fathers, which means we've got to have a changing, not changing meaning that it won't be the same government, but changing in that we want to make it modern. What does the elastic clause allow for? How is this an example of flexibility? If we look at the elastic clause, this is also known as the necessary and proper clause. Remember that this gives Congress the ability to make any laws necessary and proper for the people. This allows them to create new laws that might be needed over time. Judicial review. Here it is again. Judicial review. Under the Marshall Court, this is Marbury versus Madison, checking the constitutionality of laws. What are amendments? How are they an example of flexibility? Remember, amendment means to add. These are additions to the Constitution. It creates flexibility so that we can change or correct our Constitution to meet the needs of a changing time. Unwritten Constitution. What's an example? The unwritten Constitution are traditions and procedures that are exactly what you think. They were not written down, but we do them anyway. The President's Cabinet is an example of this. Moving right on to Section 4, we're talking elections here. Let's take a peek. What is the Electoral College and what impact can it have on elections? So the Electoral College is a way that the Founding Fathers were able to take away the power over the government out of the hands of the people. Because remember, we didn't really trust that they were all educated enough to pick the president. So we have the Electoral College of Representatives that ultimately cast the final vote for the president. The way that we get the number of electorates is by adding the number of senators and representatives together. They vote based on the popular vote, and that is the possible impact that they can have is that sometimes the popular vote is larger for one side, but they didn't get the correct or better electorate states. So if we look at Connecticut versus New York here, I like this idea. You've got 5 for Connecticut, but 15 for New York. Here, you can see that Gore won more votes, but Bush won more electorates in the Electoral College, and that is one of the reasons that he won the election. Section 5, the Bill of Rights. Define Federalist and Anti-Federalist. The root here is federal. Federalists believed in a strong federal government. If we look up here, the Constitution was perfect as it was because it gave just enough power to the federal government. Our anti-federalists say that the Constitution was a little too powerful, and what they wanted added to the Constitution was a Bill of Rights before they would ratify or vote it into existence. Summarize an amendment. You pick any one of the first 10, summarize it in your own words. We can discuss that when we are back together. And that, my friends, is the end of Unit 2. Again, let me know of any questions.